Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about transportation. You can join our discussion by calling us toll-free at 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Ed Mann, Investigative Reporter for Spotlight PA. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You recently conducted an investigation looking at how tens of millions of dollars in opioid settlement money were used in Pennsylvania. What were your findings?
We found a wide range of strategies and uses. One of the big things is medications for jail, for people who are incarcerated at jail. There's been a lot of debate, a lot of conflict over access to medications for people in that situation. That was a big one. But we also found a lot of apparent some disputes about how this money can and should be spent. You know, we've been reporting on this for more than a year now with my colleague, Kate G. Marisi of WESA. And there was a push early on to spend a lot of this money on law enforcement, police, drug task force. And so there's a lot of it to dive into.
You wrote that some counties' decisions were influenced by the threat of litigation. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so Perry and Cumberland counties, for instance, they explicitly said that they referenced the threat of litigation, talked about how lawsuits created this unfunded mandate, in their words, for jails to provide this medication-assisted treatment for people incarcerated at jails. And so there are 3 federally approved medications for opioid use disorder, but a lot of jails in Pennsylvania limit access to those medications. Some haven't offered any of them, and some, limit the type of ways they'll make them available. And the danger, according to advocates we've talked to, is that once people leave jail, if they have an opioid use disorder, they're at a very high risk for an overdose.
You'd written that some counties didn't utilize any of this settlement money in 2023. Why not?
Some counties, I think we've heard that they've had some uncertainty over what's been allowed to be used, and some counties have talked about how they just haven't found the best use for that funds yet. One of the ones we spoke to was Greene County in southwestern PA. I talked to them last year about some of the plans that apparently didn't go through. And the oversight board does seem like they want to start putting some pressure on these counties to start getting this money out there to address this epidemic.
What kind of accountability or reporting is required of counties that utilize the settlement money?
So counties have to file annual reports with the state's opioid trust. Pennsylvania, it's an oversight board with 13 members. And that's what Kate G. Marisi and I did. We did file right to know requests with all 67 counties in the state to get copies of the spending reports they filed, because the trust hadn't made them public, still hasn't put them on their website as of last night. And so we went through each of the reports and to see how they were spending the money. And now that the reports are with the trust has last week approved some of the uses. Some of them they've requested more information on, and a handful they've rejected outright.
Were any of the counties resistant to sharing information as to how they utilize the settlement?
We had 2 counties who refused to provide the records, saying that the trust hadn't reviewed them yet. But our position was that was irrelevant, that they were records of the county and that they should be made public. One of them, after an appeal to the State Office of Open Records, did provide the records to us. Another case is still pending. And some of the counties said there was sort of a technical glitch issue, that once they submitted their reports, they didn't get a copy of it. Some of them later did provide it to us, but overall, we got reports from more than 60 counties in the state. You had 67.
You had written that some question Chester County's use of the funds for a project called Project Sticker Shock. Could you talk about what this entailed and how did they defend their use of it?
Yeah, so as we were going through the reports, this stood out to us, and we questioned the county about it. It was about $1,800 committed to a project that's stated to address underage drinking and youth of an uncertain age, based on the reports. But young people go to these participating distributors and they put stickers on cases of alcohol, warning people that it's illegal to provide alcohol to anyone under the age of 21. We talked to some advocates who questioned the use of this funds, how it connected to opioid settlement money. The county, when we reached out, they had said that that underage drinking is a gateway to opioid use. So we reported that, and then on Thursday of last week, the trust, without really any much discussion, they rejected Chester County's use of that funding for that purpose, and it was one of the handful of cases where they rejected funds.
Let's talk a little bit about transparency. You had reported that earlier in the year, the Oversight Board announced that they would have private meetings to talk about how this money was utilized. What's the purpose of having private meetings if there's also public meetings being held to disclose this information?
So the private work group meeting, so there's a lot of reports, and they've been meeting in private in smaller committees to go over these reports, and then they create recommendations for the full board to consider. And the transparency experts and advocates we've talked to have raised a number of concerns about that process, namely that it shuts people out of the deliberations and that a lot of the important discussions happen in these committee meetings. And during the public trust meeting where they formally approved or rejected some of these, you could see a lot of the references was to the work group. There was a lot of issues that weren't discussed further, including, the Chester County one is a good example. That was presented, but there was no discussion from the board level about why that was not an appropriate use of funds. And that came up multiple times during the hearing. So they plan on continuing with that practice.
For how long are these opioid settlement monies expected to be available?
It's a long time. So it's an over 18-year period. There's about $1 billion already sort of secured that's set to come over that time period. There are other settlements that are in various stages of the legal proceedings, but hundreds of millions more from those other settlements. A lot of the money is front-loaded, though, so it's a lot more money in the early years than the later years.
Ed Mann, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are the chairs of the House Transportation Committee, Representatives Ed Neilson and Kerry Benninghoff. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Representative Neilson, we'll start with you. Governor Josh Shapiro proposed spending $1.5 billion on public transit over the next 5 years. What would this mean to transit agencies?
Well, it's a big boost in their economy and the way they operate. They saw a big fall off since COVID, and this will help them bounce back. Most transit agencies in the Commonwealth are going off a fiscal cliff. This will help balance that because, look, the state hasn't invested in more than a decade. It's time for us to put up and make certain our people get moved across the Commonwealth fairly.
Representative Benninghoff, your thoughts on this proposal?
Well, as you know, transportation in general is a challenge in Pennsylvania. Mass transit is a big part of that. I think one of the problems is trying to get the votes for these types of things. It's a significant amount of funding. I know some of the more rural members would like to see an increase in the fares so that the participant and benefactors are also contributing more to that ride. So I think we'll strike a balance. I think overall we see there's a need there. It's just a matter of trying to balance out exactly how that's going to be funded.
So for this year's budget, that we were looking at an additional $283 million. Where would that be derived from?
Sales tax.
Predominantly, yeah.
That's a proposal as it is now. However, there are a lot of proposals as we go into budget season. We'll see where it lands at the end.
If that comes from the sales tax, does that mean less money for the general fund?
It does, but it's replaced. The governor has a really sharp plan on how to fund this and how to fund other things in the general fund to replace it. So we have to have it all come together, and that's the key. The key is seeing how the budget comes all together. Because Kerry talks about it all the time. It's 102, 26, and 1. That's what it takes. So when we do all the compromising, and we'll see what it says on paper at the end of the day.
How would this funding be distributed throughout the state?
Well, that's always the magic equation because everybody has more needs than we ever have funding for. I think people need to keep in mind one of the things we did in the past and continue to do is we've also been taking the money that was going to state police, which was up almost $800 million at one point, and they're now getting funded out of the general funds. There's lots of things trying to tap away at so-called surpluses. We put those in the rainy day fund several years ago. Hopefully proportionally, everybody has different needs. We have a significant road structure we can talk about a little bit later, but the amount of bridges and highways that we need to take care of in addition to our mass transit really presents some significant challenges. Obviously, the mass transit in the urban areas is very important. It moves a lot of people and keeps a lot of vehicles off the road.
A reminder to our viewers, if you'd like to join in our discussion today, our toll-free number is 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text your question to us at 717-219-4001. Now, we're talking about the governor's mass transit plan and how that would be distributed. Is it a tougher sell for someone that lives in perhaps a rural district as opposed to somebody who's representing Philadelphia? I
think it is at times, but we have to understand Philadelphia, 5-county area, and plus Allegheny County provide the budget, 46% of its funding. they only get less than 20% back in services. So it's not like the rural PA is actually paying for that, because we are paying for them. We pay the police, plow, and pave many of the roads, as we can see when transportation funding goes out. So it's kind of like a fairness is how I look at it, because I come from Philadelphia, so I would think that's fair. But someone from Center County doesn't think it's as fair all the time. Actually, he understands the importance of the city.
I think it's interesting, Ed and I come from different demographics. I live in a more rural area, although we do have a pretty significant mass transit system in Center County. It's actually one of the very first ones that ever went to natural gas, got away from the diesels probably 20 years ago. They were a leader through across Commonwealth. But that said, some of our members, both in the House and the Senate, vote very parochial. They think about issues specifically to their district. I think Ed and I kind of look a little bit more global across the Commonwealth, especially when you're talking about a multiple faceted infrastructure. You know, we have railway, we have airplanes, we have mass transit, and we have roads and bridges. Those that live in rural areas only have bridges and roads, and some of them are actually weight limited because they are deteriorated to the point where they can't be used for the original use. And that makes it very frustrating for them to lay out votes for an additional $1 billion or so spending in what they feel will not come back to their district. So it's about selling the conversation and trying to better educate members. And last thing I'd tell you, keep in mind, by the end of this November's election, almost half of our chamber will be new within the last 4 years. That's significant when you're trying to use institutional knowledge of why we're making decisions not only for today, but for the future.
During the annual budget hearings, both before the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee, members had commented that some members had said they'd like to see the mass transit agencies make additional cost-cutting measures before they're granted additional funding. Are there places where these agencies can tighten their belts? Yes,
I've met with SEPTA on multiple occasions, and they are revamping their entire system and bus routes throughout the city. They too are looking to cut costs as much as they can. They're looking to be more efficient as we move forward, and that hasn't been done. Leslie Richards, through her leadership, they're calling it the bus revolution. It hasn't been done in 25 years. So she's taking 25 years of data and changing it to make it so the bus runs in a more efficient way. This way they're not sending empty buses down streets throughout the city of Philadelphia. So this is just the beginning of a long process. They've been working on this about 3 years now, and hopefully in the next 2 years it will be completed, and they'll be able to show us on paper how this worked.
Representative Benninghoff, are there additional cost-cutting measures that you see perhaps in the rural areas of the state?
Well, I would echo Ed's comment. I think we're seeing the same thing out in Pittsburgh. Catherine's trying to do the same type of thing. Because at the end of the day, even if they were to get the full amount that the governor budgeted, remember, governor proposes a budget. It's the legislature that actually appropriates the money. Even if they were to get that, the needs and the demands are going to continue to grow. So we expect all agencies that come before us to try to find their own efficiencies first. I still echo some of my colleagues' thoughts that the fares need to be increased in those areas so there is contributions by the ridership, and I think that would make it more palatable for our members to support.
If this additional funding is granted, are there specific deliverables that you're asking for from the mass transit agencies, whether it's extended hours, extended routes, something along those lines?
Well, safety has been one of the issues in some of the areas, and I think that is probably what has held down the fulfillment of the ridership from where it was prior to COVID. A lot of things get blamed on COVID, but people want to feel safe, whether driving down a road or riding in a mass transit system. So I think, and I know there's a commitment on them, their part to do that, and that's not an easy task, but people have to feel comfortable about, I think, about keeping them cleaner as well. And the efficiency that Ed spoke about in the routes, I think, was the expectation of the members to vote on this.
Representative Neal, particularly since you represent Philadelphia, can you talk a little bit about safety concerns?
The chairman hit it right on the head. It's about safety and trust, because the public ridership has to be able to trust the system that they're riding on. So I believe that with the changes they're making, the increase in technology that they're using at all the stations, at the Broad Street line, the Market Frankfurt line, they're doing a lot of improvements that should have been done decades ago and haven't. So they are making that investment, and I believe the ridership is up, and hopefully that it keeps on going up, and that's what we're looking at. Now, that's Philadelphia. Pittsburgh, we went out there, Kerry and I and the committee have been out there and visited and went all through the city of Pittsburgh, and they too are doing the same improvement systems. As the chairman said, I mean, the buses were immaculate. They didn't clean them up. They didn't know where we were going. We just got on. So it wasn't like a planned thing where they like rolled out the red carpet. You can see it. They are trying to do it, and I think they're doing a good job with the tools they're given.
Who's overseeing all the addressing the safety concerns? Is that specifically those particular transit agencies, or does PennDOT, or perhaps the cities themselves?
It's the agencies and the city leadership. From Pittsburgh's leadership to Philadelphia's leadership, it's them. They're calling accountable because they can't come into the legislature and ask us to put up votes if they're not going to do their part. So unless they prove their part, we're not going to help them. And so far, they've been meeting some measurements that we put out there, and it's going good. I think the trust, that was the key.
Can you talk a little bit about to what extent the pandemic has affected mass transit and who's done a good job of bouncing back?
I would have to say Pittsburgh bounced back better than Philadelphia has, only because of what the pandemic did is it allowed people to work from home, work remotely. And we're seeing a big damage, all that in Philadelphia. We have a big vacancy within our commercial buildings, and people aren't going in. I mean, when you go down Interstate 95 from my house down in Philadelphia Center City, you can see the difference amount of cars that are on the road. It's way easier to get there on a Friday and a Monday than it is on a Tuesday through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's something we're looking at. So that alone has still, we can't bounce that back until people start coming in and they're starting to transform properties. Pittsburgh doesn't have as many commercial space as Philadelphia has, so they're not seeing as much hurt as Philadelphia did. But ridership, like I said, ridership is coming back, and we see it coming back, and we're getting ready to celebrate the 250, and by then we're hoping everything's all straightened out, and we're going to have so many riders, we don't know where to put them. And that's the goal, to make certain our public transit system is up in shape as people visit all across the Commonwealth to celebrate 250 years of independence.
What happens to these mass transit agencies if the proposed additional funding isn't granted?
Well, obviously, they're going to have to make some adjustments. But I throw two other tidbits out there to think about. Number one, Pennsylvania is an aging state. We're the third largest aging state in the nation. So there are those who can't drive anymore, have visibility issues, or for whatever reason. And that's not limited just to the urban areas. It's a little more predominant. But look at Center County system. They're very dependent on it in some cases. They actually developed a relationship with Penn State that they actually provide all the ridership. Penn State does not have its own inner loop. So I think those kind of creative ideas is what's going to let these systems grow. The last thing I'd say to you is the other tidbit is the fact that technology is changing. And so these systems have looked at whether they want to go electric buses, do they want to go to natural gas buses, trying to change because the cost of fuel and maintaining these products is half the cost of running the overall system, and we forget about it. It's not just about the manpower, the bus itself, but maintaining all that. So there's a lot of changes that are going to be occurring, and they're trying out different methodologies to see what would be the best and most efficient, and that's our expectation.
Some of the things I'm doing in my district back at home is with SEPTA. Like one day this week, I think it's Wednesday, they'll be at a grade school with a SEPTA bus showing the first to sixth graders what it's like to ride a bus and introduce them to that now before they have to ride that bus. So it's something education-wise that we're trying to do through the city, through all the public school systems, and I hope that helps to get people to start trusting again. But it builds, you have to build that trust. It's not something that just comes, and trust is unforgiving. So you want one bad experience, could mark you for years, you won't ride.
What role does mass transit have in the state's economy?
I believe see, we all have different opinions, and mine is I believe it plays a big role. From visitors to getting kids to school, getting seniors to their doctor's appointments, it's everywhere along the line. It hits every family across the Commonwealth. Whether it's your grandchild going to school or you get into a doctor's appointment, we need to fund it because it touches every county. It does. Most people just want to talk about Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. It hits every county in the Commonwealth.
I'd like to shift our focus a little bit and talk about a bill that you're sponsoring. This would be a fee for electric vehicles. Can you explain where this idea came from? I know this was something that was kind of circulating around last session as well.
It's been around quite a few sessions. It has. And Chairman Benninghoff and I have been tasked to get all these groups together and see what we can come up with. And we believe we came up with a compromise and in House Bill 2184. And we think we have it to where the manufacturers, the environmental groups, and the legislature, we're all in agreement that we have to do something. This has been long overdue. We should have did it years ago, and we haven't. This week, I believe, on the calendar to vote is Senator Rothman's bill, Senate Bill 656, which was amended with my bill inside, that we think we have a plan that we could push forward and get enough votes. And it's 102, 26, and 1. So we think we're there. We hope we're there. We'll see what this week brings.
Just a reminder to our viewers, you can join us by calling us toll-free at 1-877-PA6-5001. Our first call today comes from Clearfield. Robert, you're on PCN.
Okay, thank you. You know, gentlemen, you said discussions about transportation, but the thing I noticed, your entire focus of your comments was directed toward Pennsylvania urban areas. Now, last week I was watching here, he said, and it was three legislators introduced the Pennsylvania Rural Revitalization Commission. And I noticed it was being introduced by three guys from the eastern part of the state. Well, that's perfectly fine, because those of us who live west of the Milesburg interchange, we just gave up a long time ago. But the main point I'm trying to say is, where does rural Pennsylvania fit in when it comes to rural transportation plans and initiatives? Remember, we pay our gasoline taxes right along with everybody else, but it seems like all you two guys want to talk about is Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and State College in Harrisburg. So, have we just been completely ignored or continue to be ignored when it comes to transportation needs of rural Pennsylvania? That's my question, and what are your thoughts? Thank you, gentlemen.
I appreciate that, and I was thinking someone was going to ask that question. You know, we started on the talk, responding to our host. But at the end of the day, rural Pennsylvania is very important. We have 24,000 bridges, about 44,000 miles of roadway to take care of, which most people don't understand. And, you know, as a gasoline taxpayer, that's why we are actually talking about the EV fees, we see that as an issue of fairness. The electric vehicles are no lighter than a gasoline car, and we believe it's high time that they pay some money towards a registration fee increase. It's probably the easiest way to collect it. And we have different numbers between the House and the Senate. Senate had a bill about $290 a year, which was basically equated by 12,000 miles of average drivership in the gas tax that we have been paid through that. Investing in rural Pennsylvania is very important. We have many bridges, as I said earlier in the conversation, that have been weight limited. On average, PennDOT tries to refurbish, replace, or repair over 300 bridges a year just to stay on course. Before Act 89, which some people still are upset about raising the gas tax, that's where that money went. And we tried to refurbish these bridges every year. These are inspected annually, and some of them are inspected more. And sadly, it's hard to keep up with that. Pennsylvania is a little bit unique in our weather because of the frost and the cold and the heat. And sadly, on top of that, as Ed and I will tell you, when we first came into this position, we didn't anticipate two major collapses of bridges, which took a significant amount of money. And they may have been in the urban areas, but that's where you have a lot of traffic. If Ed can correct me, I think the I-95 bridge that went down, that's about 140,000 cars going back and forth every day. That they are an artery that we have to repair. But rural Pennsylvania, we try our best to get our fair share, and that's why some of our members hold out in these votes when it comes to bumping up the urban needs to try to balance what we do here in central Pennsylvania. And we're going to continue to do that. At the end of the day, quality roads, quality infrastructure means commerce, and it moves people safely and moves our products in and out. I would lastly say that, you know, we are that south-north corridor to the New England states, and a lot of products go through the state of Pennsylvania, and we are very cognizant of that, and I will continue to fight for the rural regions.
And to continue on that, the gas tax we collect is for all roads and bridges through PA. It's not distributed regionally. It's based on need. Act 89, we saw what we got there, but with us transforming to hybrids and electric vehicles, we're not getting that money. We're losing over $1 billion. So we need to figure out a way to make up for that money so we can continue to invest. The infrastructure bill that came out of Washington has helped us being able. But just to put a little price tag, the I-83 bridge is a $1.3 billion replacement project. That's an issue.
Right.
Right now we have legislation pending for design build, so we can apply for federal funding to bring in and pay for half of that bridge. But the other half comes out of our taxes that we pay for gas. We have to make up, that's what the EV fee does. So it all ties together. So it's not about city versus rural, it's about overall. And we've been blessed. Transportation is not a partisan issue. So Kerry and I, we get along great. We don't have committee meetings without passing Democrat, Republican bills, proposals. We put them in position to put them in front of the House for a full vote. So that's how we're running. We take everybody's position, everybody's thoughts in consideration when we do legislation. We haven't had a partisan vote in the committee, knock on wood, since we began this session. So we try and do everything on a bipartisan way, and hopefully it keeps on working this way. I wish all committees worked like us. I mean, we say it all the time, because the philosophy, sometimes we see different things, but transportation, we want to fix Pennsylvania one bridge at a time, and we're going to get it done, and we're going to make sure everybody's treated fair as we do this.
Can I add one
Please.
tidbit? For the listener and those who might be listening in addition to that, we need to understand there's something called a 12-year plan. And so a lot of major projects are put on these projects plans that we know over the years we need to allocate a certain amount of money to get those done. A lot of those ideas are not legislators sitting around trying to decide where to fix a bridge or where to build another one. It's your local MPOs, municipal planning organizations, that come to us and say, listen, this is a problem. We have heavy congestion here. This one needs to be widened. This bridge needs to be raised. There's all types of different things. And that comes to us from the local government that you folks elect, and or complaints that they may get from their constituencies. And then we respond, and they get put on this plan because our funding is not this year's budget, we're going to just spend this much money. These are done over a long time period.
Regarding the electric vehicle fee, technically there is a fee that those who own electric vehicles should remit. Can you talk a little bit about what that's based off of and how commonly that's actually remitted in proportion to the amount of people that own electric vehicles?
It's a great question, and that's why we have to do something. There's an alternative fuels tax on electricity. Most EV fee owners don't even know about it, and the process is cumbersome, to say the least. They're not even aware of the requirement. So we barely get anything from that, and thus that's why we have to put this fee in place. And it is about fair share. Senator Rothman's bill, he was at $2.90. That's what made us the highest in the country. I didn't think that was quite fair. When we did Act 89, the gas tax rolled in over 5 years. So when we had these discussions, we said, hey, listen, let's roll this in over 5 years. Let's capture more vehicles. The senator's proposal only captured electric vehicles. Well, we captured the hybrid and the electrical in our proposal now. So at the end of this, we'll never have to come back because there's an automatic increase when we go through the whole process when it gets to its full meaning. But we believe that this is the way to go. Many of us do, some don't. A lot of people think it should be high right off the get-go. But there's sticker shock, too, as we grow into the electric vehicle market, because that's what the federal government's telling us we will do, okay? We want our fees to grow with that. But this is not a fix, and that's what people have to understand. We are $1 billion. This is going to bring in, at best, 12 to 20 million annually. That's not even going to pave a highway. So we really need to look at this, and we really need to examine how we fund our roads and bridges and infrastructure. No one wants to say it, but it's something we have to look at, and within the next 5-10 years, we're going to have to address it. Or we're going to have London Bridge will be falling down. We've already had a couple collapses now. We really need to start taking care of this stuff.
If this bill passes as it's currently in the state that it's currently in, how would what an electric vehicle owner pay compared to what somebody who owns a traditional gas-powered vehicle pays in taxes?
Well, it's not so much taxes, okay? So, see, I'm not going to do it. You're baiting me. So the Republicans tax, Democrats charge fees, okay? This is how we roll. I've rolled that in that direction for the last 12 years. So I now get to flip that switch. So it's $125 to register on top of your car registration. So most registrations are $50 now. So it will be $175 for an EV phone owner. They will pay an extra $125 starting in 2025. And that will increase $25 a year until 2029. And then starting in 2030, they will have an increase adjusted annually for inflation. This way, we don't have to revisit this again, because it's something that seems like when we always have expiring legislation, it's always an issue to get it redone. So what we've been trying to do is lift the sunshine dates through the committee. That's been our process. We've listed probably 3 or 4 sunshines already, so we don't have to keep revisiting, and we can move on and do stuff for the future of Pennsylvania.
We'll continue our discussion with the chairs of the House Transportation Committee in just a moment, but first I'd like to give our guests a brief break and tell you about what's coming up on PCN. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow morning as we discuss immigration with Representatives Joe Hohenstein and Donahue. That's tomorrow morning live at 9 a.m. Join us for On the Issues this week. Wayne Reich, CEO of the Pennsylvania State Nurses Association, joins us to discuss Pennsylvania's involvement in the Interstate Nurse Compact. Later, Representative Mike Armanini talks about his bill to encourage business startups. That's Wednesday night, starting at 7. PCN Salute to the Military is back. With a tax-deductible donation to PCN, you can recognize a veteran or active service member. A special tribute showcasing their photo, name, rank, branch, and years of service will appear on PCN and on our website from Armed Forces Day in May through the 4th of July. In addition, this year's package includes a keepsake pin and certificate for you to memorialize or present to your loved one. Visit PCNTV.com, Salute to the Military for more information. All the great public affairs event coverage and interviews you watch at PCN are now available for free online at PCNTV.com and on PCN Select. Thank you for watching PCN. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's get back to our discussion. A couple more questions on the electric vehicle fee that you're proposing. How many other states have some sort of comparable fee for electric vehicles, and how do their fees compare to what's being proposed in Pennsylvania?
At least 32 other states have passed proposals. New Jersey just did the latest one that was very controversial and very high. We hope our proposal fits right in the middle. And I believe at the end of the day, that's where we'll be. It'll be in the middle, and that's where we want to be. I look at good legislation when you have 3 stakeholders and no one's smiling on the way out. If no one's smiling, that means we got a good piece, and that's what this did. This legislation proposed, hopefully we'll see this. And there was a lot of work between the majority Senate leaders. They did it. The majority House leaders, they did it. So House, Senate, we all came together, and I believe we have an agreement, and I hope to see this moving forward soon.
An op-ed that was published in the Philadelphia Inquirer in January suggested that the proposed electric vehicle fee punishes drivers for being responsible, noting, quote, government policy should incentivize behaviors that help our communities and discourage behaviors that harm them. This is regressive tax does exactly the opposite. How do you respond to that?
I don't believe that's the case. Look, we should all treat our environment a little better. We buy cars, purchase gas-powered cars with better mileage. So there's different ways of being responsible. That's a personal feeling. Okay, we're not here to do personal feelings. Okay, on what you do, we're here to fix the roads and bridges, and they have to pay a share. Just because you have an electric vehicle doesn't mean you don't use the roads. Okay, so you must help and pay your fair share, and we believe this is what it does.
Can I add 2 comments to that? First of all, a lot of these electric vehicles, we're talking about $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 vehicles, and you're worried about a $125 registration fee. I think that's being silly. People are entitled to their philosophical ideas regarding the environment. But the reality is a lot of our gasoline cars are now getting 30, 35 miles a gallon. It's about the efficiency, but overall, this is about fairness. The weight of an EV car is no less than a gasoline car, and there are those who believe that the torque that occurs when you first step on the gas actually puts more wear and tear in the tires. But I also need to remind the voters, or the listeners, pardon me, that you're only talking about 60,000 vehicles, roughly, out of all the 8 million passenger vehicles in the state of Pennsylvania. This has not caught on that significantly, but the needs and demands to repair our roads are still there. We are still badly affected by the fact that so many people are still working from home. The majority, some entities still have a lot of their workforce at home, so significant ridership has dropped as far as who's driving on the vehicles on the road, and therefore the income's not there that was anticipated under Act 89, which most people thought would carry us 10, 20 years. At the end of the day, ironically, I get people who buy $50,000 pickup trucks, some of my friends who complain to me about the gas mileage, and I say to them, why are you buying vehicles that still only get 15 miles a gallon? Number two, we can't let things just deteriorate. And that's what happened pre-Act 89. I mean, if you look at some of the bridges out in Pittsburgh, they were wrapped in netting to keep the stone and the concrete that was popping off them from falling on vehicles. Ed and I think the committee are focused on safety, efficiency of moving goods and people. I would remind our listeners, too, we just went over work-so safety last week and sadly had another accident because people are going into these construction sites and killed 3 people. We all have a responsibility to the quality of our roads, the strength and the durability of our bridges. And as I said earlier, we're trying to make decisions for long term. Maybe the EV kicks in and maybe everybody buys an electric vehicle, but it's not happening at the level people think it should. So our proposal is to address currently, you asked a question, it's based on the amount of average miles driven by the average car owner, passenger cars. And the mathematical equation is how much is that taxed for the Pennsylvania state tax. And these fees have been devised as some equivalency of it. Is it perfect? Is it by the penny? No. But it is an issue of overall fairness.
Perhaps on a related note, how's Pennsylvania doing in terms of creating and maintaining electric vehicle charging stations throughout the state?
The first round of NEVI grants went out, and they are getting ready to award the second round of NEVI grants to make certain our infrastructure across the Commonwealth is better equipped for electric vehicles. I remember one of our reps, the first time we went out west, she was unable to make it. So it is something that we are looking at, and the federal government has been put a lot of money into it. And hopefully we're in a place that, I know we're in a better place than we were 3 years ago. How's that? And hopefully we can keep moving forward to make us a player in the game.
And I think there's some commercial application. You got to think about the vehicles that idle the most. Police cars, garbage trucks, things that are running all the time. Those are probably a better investment to be putting in those that want to have a significant impact in the environment versus the everyday individual who may only travel 15 miles a day. So there's a lot to be considered.
We received a comment via text. It says, quote, I currently own an EV. I pay tax on the electric side, which also goes to Pennsylvania. It sounds like a little double dipping.
Agree to disagree. The alternative fuel tax that EV owner is supposed to be paying, that will go away with this EV fee, so they will not be double dipped. Right now they're not paying enough or their fair share, as we identified. And Kerry talked about it earlier. We're paying $80,000 for a car. You're getting $7,500 rebate from the federal government. This doesn't even dent that $7,500 rebate. We're talking pennies compared to what it is. We're asking you to pitch in and help fix our roads and bridges. We're not asking you to maintain them all. We're just asking you to help. And it's 66,000 EV owners. I think we'll be okay. They'll be okay. It's just a fair thing to do.
Let's shift our focus now to another bill that passed the House last month, and this was a ban on most uses of handheld cell phones while driving. What should our viewers know about this bill?
Well, it's not okay to watch a movie while you're driving through our turnpike. Currently, our law allows you to do that. So this takes the phone out of your hand. And we also see, what we can see is that it's going to save lives. I mean, it's basic math. Distracted driving is no way to live. So we need to protect the public. We need to protect each other. And I compare it to a seatbelt law. Like way back when I was a kid, 90% of people didn't wear seatbelts. Only us 10% of the kids in the back seat had to wear the seatbelts. Okay, now it's 10% the other way. So we have to make certain that we take these handheld phones out of people's hands. And cars, and vehicles are all built-in technology now. There's no need for people to be texting. You can text it while you drive. You can text it over voice. You can do all that with the phones that are out there. So we're changing with technology. We need to get the phones out of hand. Hopefully the Senate will take it up this week, we hope, and bring it and get it up to the governor's desk. Senator Brown has a great proposal. This is not her first time, and it's about time we start taking care of the public and making our roads safer. That's our job as chair of transportation.
Representative Benninghoff, how do you respond to concerns that this bill might disproportionately affect people that are of a lower income because they can't necessarily afford the new vehicles that have the handheld technology?
Well, you're obviously listening to our hearing, so kudos to you, and you probably know that Ed and I voted differently on this bill. I had several concerns. Number one is the primary enforcement, that you can just be pulled over because the appearance that you might be holding a phone. You know, your phone lights up when someone else calls you. I do believe not everybody's going to have the vehicle that has the technology built into it. For some of us, Ed likes to harass me because I drive older vehicles and don't drive into the 21st century. This could be an opportunity for people to be pulled over in some cases and then be questioned on other issues. I just felt this should be a secondary enforcement. We did the same thing with seat belts, that you can't be pulled over just for this reason. I think disproportionately that could hinder those who may have lower incomes, and I said that at the committee hearing. I thought that the original fee, which I did put an amendment in, it was $150, and that's on top of all the other fees. You'd be talking about getting a bill for $200-300 for holding a cell phone. And lastly, I thought the majority of the problem was already addressed. One, we do have distracted driving laws. This seemed redundant to me. And two, we passed a bill several years ago that prohibited texting and driving. I think texting and driving is far more distracting than holding the phone. And holding a phone, which I'm not necessarily encouraging, is no less distracting than people eating an ice cream cone, combing their hair, putting makeup on, and or even changing the radio dial. Most of the newer cars had these screens on them where you still have to manually do things to them. It's not all by voice command. That it seemed kind of redundant at best and somewhat counterintuitive that we're going to fine you for one behavior when you're allowed to do another behavior, which to me is just as distracting, if not more. And therefore I was a no, Ed was a yes, but we did it as two gentlemen.
There's another provision that was attached to this bill regarding data collection for traffic stops. And the new language in the bill says the collected data, quote, shall not be accessible, end quote, under the state's right to know law. Can you explain why not?
Sure, I can. So the data is already being collected, first off. This is not a new provision. The state police and many municipalities across the Commonwealth are already collecting data to make sure no one's targeted improperly. Raw data is covered under the Right to Know Act. In this law, it will say you cannot get that raw data because raw data can be skewed different ways. We want to make certain that the data is properly entered and it is properly reviewed to make sure that nothing can be construed out of it different. Say, because the data, if you just take Philadelphia County and then you take Dauphin County, those two counties separately may look like people are getting targeted because of the population, pure population. We want to make sure that that's not happening while this data is being collected. So it's an overall collection across the Commonwealth, not just certain pick-out areas, because it can show disproportionate numbers. It can show that more African Americans in Philadelphia are getting pulled over than there are in, say, Potter County. So if you take Potter County, it looks like a bunch of white people are getting pulled over. So we want to make sure that all the data is collected and that it's all in one place and that it can be analyzed properly and no one is barred from that. So I guess that's about it. That we just want to make sure that we see the overall picture, not just pinpoints where you want a good story out of it. Because that's what we see in today's headlines. Everybody wants a good story, so it'd be great. Oh, we just showed 80 out of 100. No, that's not what we want to show. We want to show, and the numbers will prove one way or another, And this has been something that the Black Caucus in Pennsylvania House and Senate have been trying to get for probably over a decade. And I'm glad we were able to come up with an agreement on both sides of the aisle, and this is good. So hopefully we'll see. The numbers won't lie. Numbers don't lie. So.
I'd like to touch upon just one or two more brief issues before the committee, before we run out of time. The House Transportation Committee was considering whether or not to provide for digital driver's licenses. What would the benefits of a digital driver's license be?
There's a whole lot of benefits. We see some other states doing it currently. We see people, if done properly, be easier to get in and out of airports. But we want to make sure that we do comply with that technology that's in place. We don't want to go out those barriers, because if we're going to do it digital, we want to make sure that it helps everybody, not just one class of people. There are some, the current version will need to be changed from what we learned through our hearings. And I'm sure we're going to learn a whole lot more as we go through this process, because every time you think you have it, something else changes. Technology changes. We want that digital driver's license. We have to make sure that it's you in it. Real ID. That's going to be part of that process. You're going to have real ID if you want to go digital. So I encourage everybody to get real ID, and because we don't know when the federal government's all going to say, "Hey, you need it," but we'll make sure that's part of the package on the real ID, and the digital will be one and the same.
Would connectivity be a problem as well, particularly for those that live in rural areas?
It may be, but again, we're trying to keep up with today's technology. There are a lot of people who don't always carry a wallet with them. I remember several years ago, I actually took a picture on my phone of my ID for the Capitol, and the guards would acknowledge it. And as long as the date was accurate, and it was convenient, because for whatever reason, I seem to have my phone with me more than my card. And we see that with people who have to get into other facilities that need a driver's license, especially the younger generation. They're likely to have their phone, but not necessarily always. We'll iron it out, and doesn't mean everybody has to do it, but there will be a lot of safeguards built in it.
Let's squeeze in one more call before we run out of time. George is calling from Norristown. George, make it brief, please.
I'll make it brief, yeah. Two things. One is about, I live in the Center Square area of Pennsylvania, right here in outside of Norristown and Bluebell. Our northbound side of our Turnpike extension has a sound barrier. They will not put up one on the southbound side, so the sound boomerangs from there, and it has totally destroyed our area. Second thing is, why isn't there better cooperation between federal and state projects to put down at least a base coat so our cars don't get so beat up? Thank you.
Well, the good news is we now have Secretary Mike Carroll, former House member, who's taking calls from individuals like yourself at his district office, and he understands it. And he is trying to improve those relationships. We've seen it on some of the collapses when we've had federal officials come up to the collapses and tour them with Secretary Carroll. So I think we're seeing a change in leadership, and we're seeing Governor Shapiro, Secretary Carroll, and the whole administration work a lot with our federal government. And I think we have good things to see coming.
What are your top priorities as the session wraps up over the next few months?
We have a couple must things to do. We have some housekeeping items we have to do. We have to do some, I'd like to see some funding options for our aviation. We have a lot of small airports across the Commonwealth. That's something Kerry and I talk about all the time, to try and do some local funding options for them. Hopefully we can get stuff like that across the finish line. We do have some regulatory things that we have to clean up, and that's about sunshine and stuff. We've had a lot of sunshine. It seems like this year we have probably 6 or 7 things we had to get out just because they were expiring.
Right.
So now that that's off the plate, maybe we can start getting some good things and new things done. And like I said, we are trying to lift the barriers and make it easier for everybody, and road safer. I think that's our thing. If we can say anything by the end of this session, we'll be able to say we saved lives. We did.
And to try to get some road projects done. Obviously, I-95 and the Fern Hollow Bridge took a lot of resources away. I would encourage our listeners to also realize that the wrestling match we have with the federal government is a lot of these big projects are paid 80% by them, 20% with us. Well, they have a little clout on that. Every time administration changes in Washington, so do some of the characters. I hope Mike Carroll, our former House member, will stay here as a secretary, even if the administration were to change. I think that consistency and that leadership is important. But again, we're focusing on rural roads as well. Aviation, I'll just throw out there. A lot of people don't realize how much aviation is going on that are drones. And these drones are not the ones you buy at Walmart. These are ones actually delivering packages. These are helping to count the deer herd. These are getting supplies into forest fires and types of things. And so there's other aviation things that are happening outside of passenger flight. And we're very cognizant of that. And we're going to continue to expand that as technology does.
Representative Benninghoff, Representative Neilson, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PCN's Ellen Front spoke earlier with Representative Kyle Donahue about his bill that would grant limited punishments for those who harm their abusers.
Welcome to our program. Can you explain a bit about what this bill does?
So HB 1843 provides sentencing relief for child survivors of trafficking, sexual abuse, and sexual assault who commit crimes to escape their abusers. The sentencing relief only applies if the survivor defendant proves by clear and convincing evidence that the person against whom the defendant was convicted of committing the offense trafficked the minor or sexually abused or sexually assaulted the minor within 1 year before the commission of the offense.
What led you to propose this bill?
I was approached by the Justice Action Network, and they just outlined some of the background on this bill and why it was important. And I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't think we should be, punishing victims for the rest of their lives because of a crime they committed to get away from their abusers. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be, they shouldn't be held liable and actually held accountable for those actions. But we just don't believe that it should be where they're within those. Judges have to stay within those mandatory minimums.
And just for clarification, does this only apply to child victims or adult victims as well?
It does only apply to child victims of sexual abuse or trafficking.
And you said it's within 1 year, so if somebody was trafficked as a child and hurt their abuser later on in life, do they still get this bill?
No, it's only within that 1 year time frame.
So this bill, does this have a definition for like an act of self-defense or?
So existing self-defense laws are just inadequate when it comes to protecting children in these situations. A self-defense claim is usually valid in the law only when the individual feels that the danger of bodily harm is imminent. For many child victims of abuse, they're not always in danger of imminent harm under the legal definition when they commit crimes against their abusers.
Representative Timothy Bonner believes that this bill would lead to more violence. What are your thoughts on that statement? Do you agree, disagree?
I definitely disagree with that. I think it was also called vigilante justice on the House floor, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. It only applies to children who are victims. It doesn't apply to, it's not broadly applicable.
Where is this bill in the legislature now?
So the House passed this bill a couple weeks ago. So now it's in the Senate. I believe it's the Senate Law and Justice Committee, where hopefully they could take it up shortly.
And do you believe that it will have a good chance of going through the Senate? Do you think there's going to be any challenges at all?
I do. I mean, it was a bipartisan bill. I think we got 122 votes, 121 votes out of the House. My co-prime sponsor, Representative Klunk, is a Republican from York County. So it does have bipartisan support. So I'm hopeful that it could move through the Senate rather quickly.
Last question. Is it a common occurrence in the state of Pennsylvania that abused victims harm their abusers? Is this like a common thing that you see a lot?
I don't think it's common, but at the same time, I don't think we should be condemning children that commit these offenses to long prison terms. I think they should be held accountable for their actions, but it should be in a trauma-informed and age-appropriate manner. to make sure that they're getting, the mental health help they need to move past these incidents too.
Representative Kyle Donahue, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss immigration with Representatives Joe Hohenstein and Donna Shuren. That's tomorrow morning, live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.